Star Wars only, I don't know what the fuck your problem is.
The director for The Force Awakens and now The Rise of Skywalker, JJ Abrams, who also co-wrote both of those films, he's kind of the man behind the sequel trilogy, if you will. Even JJ himself wants to see the unaltered Star Wars trilogy, the theatrical cuts that we saw in 1977, 1980, and 1983, and those were changed in 1997 with the special editions that Lucas released. And since these special editions came out in 1997, we haven't had a DVD, Blu-ray modernized version of the unaltered theatrical cuts of the original trilogy. Now, I know some people are probably going to be in the comment section below saying, actually, I have one of the ones. I bought it from Walmart or Target. Where? Yeah, you got the wrong edition, buddy. I'm not going to give you the whole rundown of the story, but you're either ill-informed or just plain and simple, you got the wrong one, my friend. Either way, JJ Abrams himself wants the unaltered theatrical versions, and he even went to the powers that be at Lucasfilm to ask for this because he's a diehard Star Wars fan. Whether you like him or not, he's a Star Wars fan. And here's what JJ had to say. I've been told that for reasons that I don't quite understand, that's not necessarily possible. And then he goes on to say there's something about the original theatrical version that for so many people was what they loved. And he even talked about in this interview how on set when they were making The Force Awakens they were talking about Empire Strikes Back when Vader and the Emperor were talking. And if you recall, the original theatrical version had a female as the Emperor and she was wearing like a monkey mask or something, and the dialogue I believe was maybe a little different. Now I can't even remember. I think it was the whole goal of Lucas. But JJ and someone on set was debating that scene, and JJ said, I believe he's watching the Harmy's despecialized edition because he was saying he watched the original theatrical cut online, and I'm pretty confident if someone gave him that cut, it had to be Harmy's because that's the most popular and the best ones out there. And if you want to see the theatrical cuts, those are the ones you need to get a hold on. And I just think it's funny that we're still talking about this 22 years later after the special editions came out. Why, George? Why? And I know there's going to be some Lucas defenders in the comments below, but I mean, this guy has been so anal about having his unaltered versions not be released, and I really don't get it. And the powers that be, when JJ says that it's for reasons he doesn't really understand, it's because of George Lucas. People say that, George Lucas and Disney and Lucasfilm don't honor what Lucas wants or anything, or disrespect him. If you want to give him credit where credit is due, and this is one of the things, they're respecting George Lucas's wishes that they do not release the unaltered versions of the Star Wars original trilogy because he doesn't want them to be released. Because he is a stubborn old man, and I get it because I have the stubborn old man mentality, but he just refuses to let them be released. Even when the Library of Congress came to Lucas and said, hey, we want to put the original Star Wars film, 1977 Star Wars, into the National Film Archives, we would like to have the original cut of it. George was like, oh, well, that's great. I'm glad you love the film. Here's a special edition one. And they're like, well, no, George, we actually really want the 1970. That didn't happen. That was half a film. You fell in love with half a completed film. It's like, God damn it, George. He's the same guy who testified to Congress against the colorization of films, saying that it ruined the original intention of the artist and everything. And I find it ironic that people who really defend George Lucas's stubbornness on this, when they say, oh, well, he's the creator of Star Wars and it's his franchise and these are his films. Okay, Empire Strikes Back is not George Lucas' film. He was barely on set for 95% of that film. That is an Irvin Kershner film, and he made a lot of decisions that George Lucas disagreed with in that film. The whole line that Han Solo says in response to Leia, the whole I know thing, guess who didn't like that line? George Lucas. So George Lucas can get it wrong from time to time too, and this is, when it comes to the topics of Star Wars, this is the only one that I genuinely get a little upset about and that I get frustrated. I didn't like The Last Jedi. I'm not a big fan of what Disney has done with Star Wars, but I can get over it. I don't really care that much. And the prequels, yeah, they were a waste of times and space in my opinion, but I got the Clone Wars from them, and we can debate the merit of the prequels all day, but when it comes to the unaltered theatrical versions of the original trilogy, when it comes to the special editions, this is the only time I genuinely get a little upset and frustrated about Star Wars, where I look at George and I go, dude, This was not just a you thing, man. This is something that changed America. It changed the film industry. It created an entire culture of Star Wars fans, and it changed the modern day culture that we have in America when that film came out. And you're denying that piece of art in our time period. I mean, even the holiday special is something to look back at as kind of something like, you know what, it happened, it should belong in that decade. But those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, my friends. And I think it's awful that we can't even really remember this iconic piece of history the way it was originally released. I mean, we're having to watch these special editions that are constantly changed, from Greedo shooting first to Han about to shoot Greedo, and then Greedo goes, McClunky! And there's extra rocks added in front of R2, and Vader says no at the end of Return of the Jedi because whatever, I guess. I mean, really, a lot of the changes in the special editions are meaningless. I mean, a lot of them are just completely meaningless, and they either take away from the story or they add nothing to the story. It just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And it's just funny to hear that even JJ Abrams is going, hey, can we get the original theatrical cuts of the original trilogy? And Lucasfilm's like, no. And JJ's like, why not? They're like, well, it's just not possible. I'm sorry. It's a no. And you would think if anyone had a little bit of leeway and some say in that situation, it would be JJ. But no, Lucas still has his hand in Star Wars when it comes to those unaltered theatrical cuts. Just don't even re-release them in the theaters, George. Don't even do that. Just give me the Blu-ray versions of it, man. Give me the unaltered versions on DVD. I have the original trilogy on my VHS tapes, but I mean, I don't even have a VCR anymore. Does anyone have a VCR? I feel like those haven't been relevant in at least 18 years, if not a little more. I mean, what? George, just do it for the fans, man. We have been here for the long haul. We are the reason Star Wars has lasted this long, particularly through the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. You want to talk about Star Wars being dead, which is a stupid phrase people like to put around nowadays because they don't like the modern day Star Wars. Star Wars was basically dead in the 80s after 1983 with Return of the Jedi, because what was after that? Nothing. You had nothing for another 16 years until 1999's The Phantom Menace, or I guess you could say the 1997 Special Edition. But literally, the Special Editions marked the beginning of the divisiveness in the Star Wars fandom, where people looked at the creator of Star Wars, George Lucas, and said, What are you doing, George? What are you doing with these films? And George just was like, well, these are my films. I'm going to do them the way I want them. Fuck you. And pay me. Pay me money for it. And it's like, George, I will buy every single copy of the Star Wars franchise. You can give me all 10 of the films that we have now in 4K and Blu-ray and the other DVD version and all the extended cuts and non-extended cuts and the Clone Wars and the Rebels and the Resistance, and you can put all that into one giant box set. Charge me $300 for that set, George. And if it has the unaltered theatrical cuts from the original trilogy, I will buy them. I don't give a fuck. I will buy them. We're preserving our culture, and you're not allowing us to do it. We're having to illegally do it through Harmy, who is gracious enough to be working on that kind of stuff, but homeboy he's got a girlfriend now. He's got a nice job going on. He didn't have time to keep doing the re-edits of these things. People fell in love with the original trilogy, the unaltered versions. They didn't fall in love with the special editions. It burdens me to know that there are kids out there and prequel fans out there who have only really seen the special editions and really have no idea why the unaltered versions have so much meaning and impact. Because they don't. It's just ignorance is bliss, I guess. But those of us who know, like me and JJ, we know the burden of being the Star Wars fans who know the history and know why Lucas... Well, maybe JJ doesn't even know why Lucas wouldn't let it. Imagine how that conversation probably would have went. If JJ goes, I really want to see the unaltered versions. Can that happen? And someone at Lucasfilm probably went to George, and he's like, well, what do you mean he wants to see the unaltered version of A New Hope? He's remaking it with Episode 7. You know what this is? It's a bunch of McClunky. You tell Disney to write Daddy another $4 billion check, and then I'll give him the unaltered versions. Till then, you can kiss the under part of my white ass. Alright, I'm gonna go make a museum. $50 to get in, bitch.